"Nobody cares about that rotten fence, old man." That's what a passerby yelled as the gray-haired man hammered the third rail into place. Rust flaked with every hit. Kids rode by laughing, some filmed. He didn't respond, didn't even glance up, just kept measuring, tapping, aligning, inch by inch. But an hour later, a military convoy rumbled to a stop along the road, and one soldier stepped down, walked to the gate, and saluted what everyone else had forgotten. If you believe dignity needs no audience comment, respect below. The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned stretch of farmland on the outskirts of Millfield. Walt Granger checked his watch. 7 Huzzers a.m., right on schedule. At 80, the former Army Staff Sergeant still adhered to military punctuality, his weathered face reflecting decades of discipline that neither time nor civilian life had erased. He gathered his tools with methodical precision, a plastic bucket filled with nails of various sizes, a carpenter's level, a shayam, worn smooth from years of use, a claw hammer with a handle polished by his grip, and an American flag meticulously folded into a tight triangle. With these simple implements, he began his half-mile journey from his modest single-story home to the stretch of fence that had become his silent mission. The fence itself was unremarkable, a 100-yard stretch of weathered wood bordering what had once been fertile farmland, but now lay fallow and forgotten. Most passers-by barely noticed it, except perhaps to wonder why anyone bothered to maintain such a seemingly purposeless boundary. To Walt, however, every post, every plank, and every nail mattered deeply. "Morning, Mr. Granger," called Mrs. Hensley from her garden across the road. One of the few locals who still acknowledged Walt's ritual without mockery, he tipped his faded blue cap in response, a gesture as economical as his words had become over the years. The fence came into view, parts restored to sturdy functionality, others still awaiting his attention. Walt set his tools down carefully and began his assessment, fingers tracing the grain of each board, identifying which needed replacement, which required reinforcement, which could stand for another season. 2 high school students pedaled past on mountain bikes, slowing to watch the old man's deliberate movements. "Why fix a fence no one uses?" one asked, not unkindly, but with the genuine confusion of youth, unable to comprehend purpose without utility. Walt continued his work silent as always. "Just another vet chasing ghosts," the other boy whispered, already losing interest and accelerating away. This didn't bother Walt. He'd heard worse, much worse. Last month, a teenager had filmed him for a TikTok video narrating with exaggerated dramatics, "Old guy rebuilding Jurassic Park. Spoiler alert, the dinosaurs ain't coming back, bro." The video had garnered thousands of views, comments alternating between mockery and concern about the crazy old man spending his weekends on a pointless task. Walt remained focused on his measurements. He replaced only what was absolutely necessary, conservation of resources being second nature after his years in service. Waste nothing, honor everything, principles that had guided him through jungles, deserts, and now the wilderness of an America that has seemed increasingly to have forgotten men like him. As midday approached, he pulled a small rag from his pocket and carefully wiped clean the small brass plaque affixed to the main gate post. Unlike the fence, he kept this meticulously polished, ensuring the engraved text remained clearly legible. 42nd Infantry Rally Point, 1967. His rough fingers traced each letter, each number with reverence. To most, it was just tarnished metal. To Walt, it was sacred text, a memorial that spoke volumes in its simple declaration. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, official town stationery, with the Millfield municipal seal embossed at the top. Walt opened it carefully at his kitchen table, sliding a butter knife under the flap rather than tearing the envelope. "Dear Mr. Granger," it began with bureaucratic formality, "it has come to the attention of the Millfield Town Council that you have been making unauthorized repairs and alterations to public property along County Road 16. While we appreciate citizens' interest in community improvement, such activities must receive prior approval through proper channels. Please refrain from personal alterations on municipal land without permits. Failure to comply may result in citations." It was signed by Councilman Edward Peterson, a man 30 years Walt's junior, who had run on a platform of modernizing Millfield for the future. Walt read the letter twice, his expression unchanged. Then, with the same precision that he applied to everything, he folded it carefully along its original creases and placed it in the top drawer of his desk alongside his service medals and discharge papers. Saturday morning arrived with a chill in the air that hinted at the coming fall. Walt added gloves to his toolkit and set out on his usual route. The letter changed nothing, Some boundaries mattered more than those drawn by temporary authorities on temporary paper. The first section of fence had been fully restored over the summer months. He moved to the next segment, assessing, measuring, occasionally making small marks with a carpenter's pencil to guide his work. "You're gonna fence off the pass," next called a teenager as he sped past on a skateboard, a friend laughing alongside him. Walt simply tipped his cap, the same acknowledgement he'd offer to anyone mocker or supporter. He'd learned long ago that dignity didn't require defense, it simply required maintenance like the fence itself. As he hammered a new board into position, replacing one that had finally surrendered to rot and weather, a sudden gust of October wind caught him by surprise. The folded flag, which he'd placed carefully atop his toolkit, tumbled into the roadside dirt. Walt immediately set down his hammer. He knelt his joints, protesting with the stiffness of age, and gently lifted the flag. With meticulous care, he brushed away each speck of soil, his weathered hands treating the fabric as tenderly as a parent might touch a child's face. For a moment, he simply held it, eyes closed, memories washing over him like incoming tide. A pickup truck roared past, horn blaring. "Nice job wasting wood, Pops," someone yelled from the passenger window, followed by derisive laughter that lingered in the air long after the vehicle disappeared around the bend. Walt reopened his eyes, carefully refolded the flag into its triangular shape, and returned to his work. The afternoon sun cast his shadow long across the ground as he continued measuring, cutting, replacing one board, one nail, one memory at a time. In town at the Crossroads Diner, where locals gathered for gossip and coffee, Walt's fence had become a recurring topic of conversation. Council sent him a letter. "You know," said Martha Ellis, who worked as a secretary at the municipal building, "he's technically trespassing on town property." "Seems harmless enough," replied Frank Donner, the hardware store owner, who had sold Walt nails for years. "Man wants to fix a fence. Let him fix a fence." "It's weird though," insisted Brad Turner, who coached the high school football team. "My kids say he's out there talking to himself sometimes. Maybe someone should check on him. You know, make sure he's all there." The conversation shifted to other topics as the pie was served. Walt's fence relegated to the status of small-town curiosity, a minor mystery not worth solving. Meanwhile, on the highway that connected Millfield to the larger world beyond, something unexpected was occurring. A convoy of 6 vehicles, 2 Humvees in the lead, followed by transport trucks, all bearing military license plates, had exited the interstate. According to their GPS, the most direct route to their destination took them straight through Millfield, down the very road that ran alongside Walt's fence. Inside the lead vehicle, a navigation officer consulted his tablet. "Sir, we're approaching the town of Millfield. ETA to rally point marker is approximately 7 minutes. The commanding officer nodded. "Slow the convoy as we approach. This is a significant stop. If you believe forgotten fences still guard sacred ground, comment, respect below." The afternoon light had softened to gold when Walt lifted the final plank into position. His back ached from the day's labor, but satisfaction ran deeper than discomfort. This section was complete now, straight, strong, ready to stand against whatever weather the coming seasons might bring. He was gathering his tools when the first rumble reached him, a deep mechanical growl that seasoned veterans recognize instantly. Military transport, not one vehicle, but several moving in formation. Walt straightened, hammer still in hand, as the convoy came into view around the bend. 6 vehicles in perfect procession, slowing as they approached his position. The lead Humvee came to a complete stop directly opposite the gate where the brass plaque caught the late afternoon sun. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the passenger door opened. A soldier stepped out, a man in his late 30s, his uniform crisp, his posture unmistakably that of someone who understood the weight of the cloth he wore. Captain's bars gleamed on his shoulders as he crossed the road with deliberate steps. Walt remained motionless, watching as the officer approached the gate. The captain paused, reading the small brass plaque. His expression shifted subtly, recognition, understanding, a respect flowing across his features in rapid succession. Then, with a movement born of thousands of repetitions, he straightened his spine and raised his right hand in a formal salute, holding the position with perfect stillness. Walt watched from a few steps back, his hands dusty from the day's work, his eyes suddenly moist with unexpected emotion. After a respectful interval, the captain lowered his hand and turned toward Walt. "You serve?" the captain asked, though something in his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Walt nodded once. "Staff Sergeant, 42nd Infantry." The captain's eyes widened slightly. "Sir," he began, his voice taking on a quality of reverence rarely heard from officers addressing enlisted men. "This is where my father said goodbye before deploying in '67. He never made it home. I was told this fence marked where they stood. Understanding washed over Walt like a wave, leaving clarity in its wake. Johnston, he said softly. Your father was Captain Robert Johnston. The younger man's composure faltered momentarily. Yes, sir. How did you? I was here, Walt replied simply. Rally Point coordinator. I checked every man's papers as they boarded. Your mother, he showed me your picture, said he had a boy who'd grow up to be a soldier someday. The captain knelt, touching the gate post. Walt had just reinforced his fingers, tracing wood that had witnessed a moment he'd only heard about in family stories. Thank you, he said quietly. Thank you for keeping it alive. Behind them, something remarkable was happening. The convoy had shifted position, forming a line alongside the field. Doors opened. One by one, soldiers stepped out, some young, some seasoned, all moving with purpose. They formed a line facing the fence, and as their captain had done, each raised a hand in salute. Passing cars slowed, then stopped. Drivers emerged, curious at first, then somber as they began to understand the significance of what they were witnessing. A few removed hats or placed hands over hearts. Among them was a boy Walt recognized, the same teenager who had mocked him the day before. Now he watched in silence, skateboard tucked under his arm, his face a study in dawning comprehension. A local news van pulled up, drawn by the unusual sight of a military convoy in their small town. A reporter approached cautiously, asking quiet questions that led to the story's headline. The following day, Forgotten Fence receives unexpected salute from active duty soldiers. The rally point that never stopped waiting. As the light faded, Captain Johnston explained the convoy's presence. A training exercise had brought them near Millfield, and he had requested permission for a brief detour to visit the site he'd heard about throughout his childhood. We had no idea someone was maintaining it, he admitted. In the unit there were stories about this place that sometimes late at night, soldiers waiting for deployment could still be seen gathering here. I thought it was just military folklore. Walt shook his head. Not folklore, memory. As long as one person remembers, nothing is truly lost. Before departing, the captain presented Walt with a unit patch. Today's 42nd descended from, but evolved beyond the one Walt had known. We'd be honored if you'd accept this, Sergeant Granger. As headlights illuminated the newly restored fence section, the two men, separated by generations, but united by service, stood in silence, honoring what had been preserved and what had been lost along a boundary that meant nothing to most, but everything to those who understood. The following Tuesday, Walt arrived at the fence to find something unexpected. A new sign, professionally made, mounted beside the brass plaque, preserved in honor by the 42nd Infantry sons and daughters. Below it, a smaller inscription. This site marks where fathers, brothers, sons and friends gathered before deployment to Vietnam 1967. 12 men from this rally point never returned. Walt stood motionless, reading the words again and again. Someone remembered, someone understood. After decades of solitary maintenance, of weathering mockery and misunderstanding, the significance of his quiet mission had finally been recognized. The next Saturday brought another surprise. As Walt approached with his toolkit, he found 3 people already at the fence, a middle-aged woman and 2 teenagers, all wearing work gloves and looking somewhat uncertain. Mr. Granger, the woman called. I'm Linda Fitzpatrick. My father was with the 42nd. These are my kids. We thought maybe you could use some help. Walt hesitated only briefly before nodding, reaching into his bucket to offer extra nails. Always room for more hands, he said, his voice rough from disuse. Word spread quietly through certain channels. The rally point was remembered again. The fence had guardians. Through late autumn and into winter, Walt found himself with company on Saturday mornings. Sometimes veterans, sometimes family members of those who had served, sometimes simply community members who now understood the significance of what they had once dismissed. Kids from town began to help, learning to use levels and hammers under Walt's patient guidance. In return, they heard names and stories that never appeared in textbooks. Ordinary men who had gathered at an ordinary fence before heading to extraordinary circumstances. Captain Johnston kept in touch, sending a letter and an old photograph. My dad at that gate in '67, same fence, same pride. Thank you for preserving not just wood and nails, but history itself. As his 80th year gave way to his 81st, Walt began to recognize his own limitations. His hands weren't as steady, his back protested more loudly. With characteristic foresight, he approached the local VFW post. Keep it quiet, he instructed, as he handed over his most detailed diagrams of the fence's construction. Keep it clean, keep it standing. 3 years later, when Walter Granger passed peacefully in his sleep, there was no question about where his memorial service would be held. Not in a church, Not at a funeral home, but by the fence that had defined his final chapter. One bugle played taps as the setting sun painted the horizon crimson. One flag was folded with precision and presented to his niece, his only surviving family, and one wooden sign was added beneath the others. Walter Granger, Staff Sergeant, 42nd Infantry, 1942 to 2025. He never stopped guarding the line. Subscribe to Steelheart Stories if you believe some posts don't mark property, they mark memory. Steelheart Stories.